Okay, so let's do a quick review of where we're at right now. I lost the pen. Oh no. Oh no. Here it is. Okay. Let's do a quick review of where we've come so far. We start with the story of what? What's this represent here? Sin, yes. Sin, this is the prologue, Genesis 1 through 12. The story of sin in the entire world. Sin is the problem that needs fixed, and clearly only God can fix it. And so what's he do?
He has the three patriarchs.
He makes the covenant, the contract, the promise with the three patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And what is that promise? What is that covenant?
Multiply. He's going to multiply them.
He's going to multiply them. What else?
Give them a land.
He's going to give them a land. Yes. What else? What?
The promise of the land for Israel,
Mm-hmm.
all that land that's the promised land.
Yeah. He's going to give them a specific land for them as a nation. What else? Anyone remember where the promise is found? Genesis 12. Did you say something, Becky? The tribes. Yeah. So the promise. Let me see if I can find it really quickly. The covenant, the contract, is that he's going to bless them. He's going to bless them, make them a great nation for the purpose that they will be a blessing. That's Genesis 12:2. This is verse 3. I will make of you a great nation. So this is what we're focusing on. This is our kind of outline for the story. They're going to be a great nation. They're going to be a blessing. They're going to be great. And the purpose is that in them all the families of the earth shall be blessed. So those who are with them will be blessed. Those who are against them will be cursed. The whole point is they're going to be a great nation. God is going to bless them so that he can bless the world through them. Okay, so back to our graphic. He makes that covenant, that contract, that promise. And so the first thing we're looking for is people, and that starts to happen with what's this box represent?
The 12 sons of Jacob.
12 sons who become the 12 tribes. Then this box, what's it represent? Multiplication, specifically where? They multiply in Egypt, and that is not the promised land. So God first does what here? He appoints a leader, and that leader's name is Moses. And through what event does he bring them out of Egypt? The Exodus. Nice. From Egypt towards the promised land. They're in the wilderness on the mountain, Mount Sinai. And what does he give them? The Ten Commandments, the law. Why does he give them the law? I heard some of those things, but I didn't hear what anyone said specifically. So they need order, they need policy, they need things to obey in order to make them a nation. What'd you say?
I said that's what we said.
Yeah, verbatim. So they get the law, and then what's this one represent? The next one.
Where they're in the woods for 40 years.
They're in the wilderness wandering for 40 years. They actually spend 2 years on Mount Sinai, 38 years wandering through the desert. And why are they wandering? They didn't trust God. What? They disobeyed. What specific event caused God to say, you're not getting into the promised land? Yes, 12 spies go into the land, 10 come back, say we can't do it, 2 say that we can do it. The people trust the 10, and they don't think that God is going to be able to give them the land because they're afraid of the people. And so God says, because you're not faithful, because you don't trust me, all of you who are 20 years old and older are going to die. And we come to the end of that time, the end of the books of Moses, which is Genesis through Deuteronomy, into the book of Joshua. And what's this picture represent?
Promised land, splitting of it.
The the promised land for all 12 to get the 12 tribes to go into 12 different
North and
areas.
south.
Yes, the land, the Israelites come into the land is distributed. What else happens? What do the arrows represent?
Conquer it in half, then south, then north.
Yeah, so there's it's a military campaign. They kind of divide the land in half. Then there's a southern campaign. Then there's a northern campaign, and all of the land sort of is before them, and then it's distributed to the 12 tribes, and that's where the book of Joshua ends. And then we come to the book of Judges, and what's this picture represent?
That it's the book of, well, it's Ruth, and how there is still hope or faith, that's what the little shining thing is.
Yep, Ruth is our little shining moment in the book of Judges. What's the rest? What's going on in this picture here? Evil, sin, wickedness. Everyone does what's right in their own eyes. There's no king in Israel is the theme of the book of Judges. And so it's just rampant wickedness. There's still division among the land, not unity between the tribes. It is a hot mess. Ruth is the only shining spot in the context of Judges. And then we come to the book of 1st and 2nd Samuel. And what does this block represent or mean? Samuel he's actually the prophet, and it's not the judge. So we're still in the context of Judges. But he's the leader, the ruler that does what for Israel? Why is he covering the whole block?
Unity and obedience.
Yes, he finally starts to bring some unity to the 12 tribes. He's judging. He does a circuit all around Israel. He brings people together, but not long into his time, the people demand what? They demand a king to rule over them like all the other nations, a king who will fight their battles for them. And so God anoints a king, and who is that king? Saul, King Saul. And King Saul is this good-looking dude who stands out above everyone else, but he doesn't understand the value of his position. He seems to be a little bit timid, and when push comes to shove, he does not trust God. Does anyone remember any of the stories that were reflected that showed us Saul not obeying the Lord? There were 3 examples that we looked at last time.
I know he's impatient with a sacrifice.
Yes, that was the very first one. I'm not sure if I could remember all 3, but there's a sacrifice. He's supposed to wait 7 days. Samuel is going to show up at the end of the 7 days, but the Philistines, I believe, are getting pretty close, and they're about to take over Israel. And Saul gets impatient, and he makes a sacrifice, a rash sacrifice. It's not his position. And then immediately Samuel shows up and says, "What have you done?" And he makes excuses. The second one is he makes that rash vow. He says that no one's allowed to eat, and his son Jonathan eats, but is victorious over the Philistines. But Saul almost puts him to death because he trusts his vow more than what's right in that scenario. And then the third one is when they go, this might be with the Amorites, I can't remember, but they have a battle, and the people take some of the sheep and some of the good things that are supposed to be destroyed. And Saul says, essentially, the people did it, not me, but they were going to make this really nice sacrifice to the Lord. And he makes all these excuses in front of Samuel, and Samuel says, "The Lord is looking for a man after his own heart. He's rejected you as king, and he's going to find another person." And so almost immediately, the Lord anoints another king, and who is this one here in our last block? King David, who's basically a teenager. Not basically, we're pretty sure he's a teenager when he's anointed. He waits about 15 years before he finds the fulfillment of that anointing. When Samuel goes, he's the runt of the family. All of his, I believe, 7 older brothers are rejected by God because man looks on the outward appearance. The Lord looks at the heart, and he's looking at David's heart, and he says, "This is the guy. This is the man after my heart." He chooses David. David ends up getting a lot of favor from the people. He's victorious in battle, and that makes Saul jealous, and Saul constantly just tries to kill him. And that is the story of David. Eventually, as we come to the end of 1 Samuel, Saul dies, Jonathan dies, David finally gets to be king. He's been faithful this whole time, and yet he ends up having a conflict with his own son Absalom, and some of the kingdom gets taken away from him, and he flees from his son Absalom, and it's this whole thing. 40 years David is king over Israel. He unites Israel. He's a man after the Lord's heart, and he is faithful. He is patient. He is trusting. He is everything that we want to be. And so if you recall, we're looking at this as a three-act play. Act 1 is God bringing redemption through a nation. Scene 1, which we've been on up until this point, is 12 steps to a great nation, and we are finally on step 12. We are almost there to the fulfillment of the promise that God made to Abraham and to Isaac and to Jacob. So, yes?
You told us last time, tell us about David's first 2 battles.
Oh yeah, David's first 2 battles. I doubt I'll find, thank you for remembering that. I doubt I'll find where it is, but one of the stories I neglected to tell last time was right when David starts, I think it's in the beginning of 2 Samuel. If I can't find it real quick, I'll just tell what I remember. David goes out to battle. It's 2 Samuel 5, starting in verse 17. He goes out into battle, or the Philistines come to attack him, and David sees them, and what he does, rather than Saul, who rashly goes into fighting the Philistines, doesn't consult with God. David consults with God and says, "What should I do?" And the Lord says, "Go up. You're going to win this." And so he goes up and defeats them. Once again, starting in verse 22, the Philistines show up, and there's going to be another battle. And David does the same thing. He doesn't assume that the Lord is going to give him victory again, just because the Lord gave him victory before. And so he says, "Lord, should I go up?" And in verse 23, the exact opposite happens. The Lord says, "No, don't go up. Not this time. Not this fight." And so David doesn't do that. And it says, verse 24, he's just told him not to go up. "When you hear the sound of marching in the tops of the balsam trees, then rouse yourself, for the Lord has gone out before you to strike down the army of the Philistines." And David did as the Lord commanded and struck down the Philistines from Geba to Gezer. So he chooses not to go out into battle because the Lord tells him not to. And then the Lord eventually works his own victory, and David is victorious over those people. So yeah, thank you for that reminder. All right, now we are going to, having reviewed all of that, we're going to finish up David's story, and we're going to jump into the book of 1 Kings, and things are going to move very quickly through 1 and 2 Kings. Yeah, I think we've reviewed just about all of it. One of the things to note is that in 2 Samuel 8, one of many times, we get kind of like this montage of David fighting multiple battles, and you got to wonder what the intention of the text is for that scenario. And it's among many things, one of the things that particular story does is it shows David actually makes the land of Israel even bigger than Saul had it. So the distribution of the land in Joshua gets even bigger because of David's favor and David's victory. Psalm 78 is one of those psalms that just spends its whole time praising the Lord because of the things that he's done, mostly in some of the stories that we've seen already to this point. But it ends with this quote. So again, 70 verses, it's gone through the story of what God has done for the Israelites, and ends with these 3 verses. He, God, chose David, his servant, and took him from the sheepfolds. From following the nursing ewes, he brought him to shepherd Jacob, his people. I love that imagery. First he's a shepherd of sheep, then he's a shepherd of people. To shepherd Jacob, his people, Israel, his inheritance. With upright heart he shepherded them and guided them with his skillful hand. That's how that psalm ends. It's just a beautiful picture, a beautiful summary of David's ministry to the people. And so, when we come to the end of 2 Samuel, now David is old. We have the same problem that we have basically at the end of every book we've come to at this point. Our leader is old. One of those things in the checklist that we always refer to, see if I have it. we have people, we have a multitude of people, we have a leader with David, we still have the law, and he's obeying the law, and he's teaching the people to obey the law. We're still in the land, and so the last thing we come to in that promise, that covenant in Genesis 12 with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, is are they fulfilling the purpose? Are they blessed so that they can be a blessing to the rest of the world? And the answer is not quite yet, because not quite yet with Saul's story, but when David comes in, the answer seems to be yes, because he's a man after God's own heart and he's leading his people. But now David is about to die. His story is about to end, and we haven't seen the fulfillment of the promise. We haven't seen a blessing to the nations yet. And so we keep this checklist in mind and anticipate that a leader is coming, and that's exactly what's going to happen. A leader is going to come and be the one that replaces David. And that leader is who? Well, we have, go ahead, yeah, someone knows the answer. Solomon. That's interesting that you say that, Patty, because Solomon is not David's first son. David, in fact, has, according to 1 Chronicles 19, at least 19 sons through several women, which we've seen in the past has been an issue, maybe not condemned directly in Scripture, but tends to cause certain family drama. But we have David's children. First is a man named Amnon, whatever. He's killed by his brother Absalom. Absalom is the one that chased David. So we have Amnon first. He's dead. Then we have one who's listed in 2 Samuel, I think, chapter 3. His name is Kileab, which in 1 Chronicles is Daniel. We hear nothing else about this son. It's not the Daniel of the prophets. And so chances are he died before he could play any significant role in the story. Then we have Absalom after that. He has just died in the story of 2 Samuel, and Joab killed him. He's the one that's hanging possibly by his hair or by his throat in the tree. He gets stabbed. And then the fourth son we have is Adonijah. And so our story begins in 1 Kings with the son whose name is Adonijah, the fourth in line, now ultimately the first in line to be king. And what he does is no one has been announced as king, so what he does is he takes an entourage with him. Some people he excludes, including his brother, half-brother, stepbrother, whatever, Solomon, Nathan the prophet, and someone else I think he excludes. And he brings these people around him and he announces himself as king over Jerusalem, over Israel. And he becomes king. But Nathan the prophet and Bathsheba, Solomon's mother, the one with whom David committed the many egregious sins in 2 Samuel 11. Bathsheba and Nathan the prophet are talking, and Nathan says, if you want to keep your son alive, because chances are everyone else who's a threat to the throne is going to be killed, if you want to survive, go tell David, you made this promise to me that my son Solomon would be king. And now I looked everywhere to find where that promise was, and as far as I can tell, it does not precede this story. Now, it may be true, but it also may be a little bit of conniving or maybe wisdom from Bathsheba, who goes to King David and says, you made me this promise that my son, despite the birth order, would be king over Israel, so fulfill that promise. And at this point, the text already tells us that David's old. In fact, the story starts kind of in a strange way. There's this young, beautiful woman that's brought to King David because he can't keep warm, which might be a euphemism because the text tells us he doesn't sleep with her. Maybe he can't sleep with her. We don't know. It's weird, but the point is he's old and he's probably a little senile and he needs a replacement. And so Bathsheba says, you promised to make my son Solomon king. And so David has this big old formal celebration. He brings in the prophets. He brings in people to announce that sure enough, Solomon is his official king, the one that he gives his blessing to. And so in 1 Kings chapter 1, Solomon is made king. Now Adonijah, his brother who set himself up as king, says to Solomon, it says he grabs the horns of the altar in the temple and says, promise me that you're not going to kill me. And Solomon says, if you're a good man, if you're wise, then a worthless fellow, then you'll be fine. Well, later Adonijah will ask for Abishag, the young beautiful woman who was brought to warm David up. Adonijah wants her as his wife, and Solomon does not think that's a good request, and so puts him to death. So as we transition, we see that Solomon is the one who's appointed specifically by David. In chapter 2, David gives him these farewell instructions. I'm about to die. Here are some things to keep in mind. 1, this dude Shimei. If you remember him, he's the one that cursed David and threw rocks at him and called him a dog. And David's response was, my own son Absalom wants to kill me. Let this dog keep cursing. I'm not going to do anything. And so he promises not to kill Shimei because he's kind. But he says to his son, you know what to do. He doesn't tell him explicitly to kill him. He says, you know what to do. Same with Joab, one of his commanders. Joab has proven himself to be a character who will kill at the first possible opportunity. And so David says to Solomon, don't let his blood go without punishment. Again, you know what to do, is what he says in the beginning of chapter 2. So Solomon eventually kills Adonijah, eventually kills Shimei, eventually kills Joab. And so all of these people who would stand against him, all of these people who would cause conflict and turmoil within his kingship are killed. And then Solomon prays for wisdom. And this is the famous origin story of Solomon. God says, ask for me, tell me what you want from me. And Solomon does not choose riches, does not choose power, doesn't choose any of these things. He chooses wisdom. He says, I want to know what to do. I want to know how to follow you. So God says, because you chose wisdom, not only will I give you wisdom, but I'll give you riches, I'll bless you, all these things. And so when we come to chapters 3 and 4, that's exactly what we see. We see some very significant marks that are showing us as we move to our graphic. This second crown here is Solomon, Shlomo in Hebrew, if that matters to you. They're in the same box because they're of the same lineage. It's Solomon's son. We should have had another crown below Saul, but because he was rejected, another king from another family was chosen. We have another block. But now Solomon, his son, is reigning. And we notice some interesting things. First, he's given riches and honor in chapter 3, verse 12, and chapter 4, verse 29 specifically. No, not 29. I think in the beginning of chapter 4, maybe. People are bringing him wealth from all over. So we see riches from him. He's a theocratic ruler. He's a ruler that displays God's wisdom. Chapter 3, verse 28, the last verse there, it's that story of 2 prostitutes come and they have one baby between them because one died in the middle of the night. The other tried to steal it. Hopefully you read the story. Solomon shows his wisdom, and the response is that people are in awe. Verse 28 says, they perceived that the wisdom of God in him was in him to do justice. It's not just a man's wisdom. They clearly understand that this is the wisdom of God through him. So God's wisdom is being distributed through his people. He's a theocratic ruler, meaning a political ruler where God is the head and he is the vessel through whom God works. Theocentric arts, meaning God is the focus of the art. In chapter 4, verse 32, Solomon also spoke 3,000 proverbs, and his songs were 1,005. He spoke of trees from the cedar that is in Lebanon, and it goes on to tell of some of the things that he apparently included in his poems and songs. And so a focus on God and nature, a focus on God and wisdom. Solomon is leading his people to God. There's population explosion. If you look at chapter 4, verse 20, Judah and Israel were as many as the sand by the sea. If you remember way back in Genesis 22, that is the promise that God made to Abraham, that your offspring will be like the sand on the seashore. And finally, we are seeing the fulfillment of that. You can see why we're finally at the end of Act 1, Scene 1. We are finally to the place where the nation is being blessed, and hopefully they are being a blessing to those around them. tons of prosperity all over Israel. Verse 25 of chapter 4 says that every man sat under his own vine and under his own fig tree all the days of Solomon. So people are individually wealthy. There's peace and prosperity. Verse 24 says he had peace on all sides around him. They don't have to worry about fighting, which is actually why Chronicles says that Solomon is chosen to build the temple and not David, because David was a man of war with blood on his hands. Solomon has these times of peace. And we see a huge expansion of the land. David expanded the land from Saul, made Israel bigger, and now Solomon in verse 24 and verse 21 show the borders to Israel have now increased to as big as they've ever been. In fact, as big as they will ever be, I'm pretty sure. And so the very next step is that thing that David wanted to do. When God makes the covenant with David, he does it in the context of rejecting David as the one who will build his temple. But in chapter 5 says, Solomon says, you promised my father that his son would build the temple, and so I'm going to build the temple, and the Lord blesses him to do that. And so chapters 5 all the way through maybe chapter 8 is Solomon building the temple, and it is immense, and it is beautiful, and it is significant. And so we have in your drawing we have a little crude representation of the temple, however you want to draw that. But the unique thing is, one, the features of the temple mimic things like, especially like the Garden of Eden. There's a big bowl that represents the sea. It cleanses the sacrifices. There's pomegranates and palm trees all over the place. Everything is covered in gold and bronze. It shines, it shimmers, it's beautiful. Some of the weights that are described, the gold that's brought to Solomon, I think it ends up being 666 talents. Obviously that number sticks out. And a talent is 120 pounds. So I don't know what that math is, 600,000, is that right? Pounds of gold, something like that. It's an incredible amount of gold used to decorate the temple. It is something that is not like anything that has ever been seen, and something that will never be seen again. In fact, there are many iterations of the temple. This is the first one. I think by the time we get to the life of Jesus, they're on the third one, but none of them are as beautiful as this one. And so here's this beautiful story of the temple being built, and we start to see exactly what we're looking for, which is that the glory of God is going out into the nations from this temple. Like, it is a bright shining light. The Queen of Sheba comes. People from all over the world come to see the wisdom of Solomon and to see the temple. And Isaiah 2 says that the nations will flood to Israel, and that's exactly what happens. The nations are flooding to Israel to see this temple, to see this godly man, to see God's nation. And finally, if we recall our checklist, which I'm not going to bring back up, if we recall our checklist, we are seeing not just the nation being blessed, which God has done through every part of the story up until this point, but also what we haven't seen to this point, which is that the nation is being a blessing to those around them. It is, it's obvious why it seems like we are finally at the end of the story, the fulfillment of the promise, of the covenant, of the contract. And so God's glory is going out, and yet the nations are coming in, however you want to represent this on your drawing. It is a significant place. In fact, we probably can't, as 21st century Christians, understand the significant weight of the temple. It is the place of worship. It is the place that God dwells. We have a misconception that the church is that today. That is not true. The church is the assembly of God's little temples. We've all, by God's grace, been made God's dwelling place. But this is significant. This is the only place in the world that people can come to find the house of God, to find where God lives, where God's people are. This is when Solomon dedicates the temple. 1 Chronicles says that fire came down and consumed the sacrifice, and he says this prayer of dedication in 1 Kings maybe 7, where he says, no, not 7. 8:22, thank you. Starting in verse 12 of you're right. Chapter 22 is this long prayer of thanking God for what He's done, and he says in verse 27, will God indeed dwell on the earth? That's an important question. Can God really live in this little golden house that Solomon has made? Behold, heaven and the highest heaven cannot contain you. How much less this house that I have built? So what he's saying is, not even all of heaven can contain God. He's not contained by this building, but there is something unique happening here. It is his dwelling place where he lives uniquely in no other way that he has before this. And so this is significant. This is, I keep saying significant, because I can't think of a better word. But whatever that better word is, it's that. But we have a few cracks in that brilliant light. Don't ignore the fact that we are seeing the fulfillment of the promise. This would be the perfect time for Jesus to come. It's done. Like, this book should be over. That we've gotten to where God said we needed to get. And so we think back through all those stories of sin and all the rebellion of the people, and for just one brief moment, just a few chapters, we don't see anything about sin. All we see is the glory of God in and out of this place, in and out of his people celebrating and rejoicing. And this should be the end of the story. But there's a few instances where there's a bit of foreshadowing, I think. Like, for instance, in chapter 7, in the middle of the story of Solomon building this temple, is the story of Solomon building his own palace. Literally, sandwiched before it and right after it is the story of building the temple. But if you're paying attention to the dimensions, the temple is 60 feet long, 20 feet wide, and 30 feet high. It's got the Holy of Holies in it. Of course, it's all those things that I already described. 60, 20, 30. Solomon's palace that he makes is also very ornate, and it is 100 feet long, 50 feet wide, and 30 feet high. 60, 20, 30 versus 150, 30. It's strange. Solomon builds a bigger house for himself than he does for God. Now, the instructions were clear in the books of Moses on how to build the temple, and so it could just be chalked up to he's just following the rules, but he wants a big house to play in, apparently. But he also, in this description, builds a section onto the back of his palace, which is for his pagan wife, Pharaoh's daughter. And there are descriptions that she has her own place to live also that Solomon built. And so there are little cracks in the story, little cracks in the light. And we have to wonder what's going on. Where is this going to head? What is going to happen? Well, of course, the story continues after it took 7 years to build the temple, 13 years to build his palace, a total of 20 years to build all of these things. Fine gold, beautiful. Let's go back to our checklist. Well, we've already talked about that. We have people, we have a law, we have a leader, we have the land, and finally we have the blessing. We have all of these things. And then we come to chapter 11, and everything changes. Chapter 11, verse 1. Now King Solomon loved many foreign women, along with the daughter of Pharaoh, Moabite, Ammonite, Edomite, Sidonian, and Hittite women. Now, if we just pause there, there's some problems and probably some things that are not problems. The thing that's a problem is that God regularly warns his people against intermarrying with the nations. And so we see an issue there, foreign wives. But the issue is not that they are foreign. The issue is that God condemns the marriage of foreign women because of what they will do, which is lead his people astray. If you remember, Ruth is a Moabitess. She's a pagan woman when she marries a Jewish man, and she becomes the only bright spot in the context of her story. The problem is not that she's a foreign woman. In fact, there are 5 women listed in Jesus' genealogy in Matthew 1. 5 women. 4 of them are pagan women. Bathsheba, who David slept with, what's her name? Rahab, who was the lady at Jericho. Let's see if I have them listed. Ruth, of course, who's a Moabitess, and Tamar from Genesis 38, who is probably a Kezebite woman, if you look at that chapter. 4 out of the 5 women in Jesus' genealogy are foreign women that God brings his Messiah through. So the issue is not that God can't work with foreign women or foreigners. They're expected, in fact, to join the Israelite ranks and to worship Yahweh. The issue is not foreign women. The issue is Solomon's heart. Verse 2 says, concerning these women from the nations, concerning which the Lord had said to the people of Israel, you shall not enter into marriage with them, neither shall they with you, for surely, here it is, they will turn away your heart after their gods. Verse 3, he had 700 wives who were princesses, 300 concubines. And listen to this last horrific sentence, and his wives turned away his heart. He is the son of the man after the Lord's heart. He is the man who was granted his prayer, his petition for wisdom, but nonetheless, his heart turns away from God because of these women. And just a few verses later, he makes worship places for horrible gods, including Molech and Chemosh, both of whom are famous historically, and we'll see some stories either in this lesson or the next for child sacrifices. And yet to assuage his wives, Solomon makes these places and these women lead his heart astray. And so the Lord promises that he is going to take the kingdom away from Israel, and it is a sad, sad story. So we've come to the end of, let me see if I can find our graphic. We've come to the end of the 12 steps to a great nation. We have the glory in the temple. We have King Solomon. We had our chance at the fulfillment of the blessing. Act 1, Scene 1 is now over, and everything's about to change. As we enter into step 2, Scene 2, the Lord says he's gonna take the kingdom away from Solomon, but because of David, he's not going to take it away in his lifetime. He's going to do it through his son. And so in the end of chapter 11, the Lord raises 3 adversaries against Solomon. The first is a man who was, if you remember who Joab was, the commander of David's army. Joab went in and killed a bunch of Edomites, that's descendants of Esau. But this man, Hadad, in 11:14, survived, and I believe he's the one that fled to Egypt for a bunch of years. And when he finds out that King David has died, he comes up to be a thorn in the side of Solomon. And then in 23, there's another adversary, another enemy. His name is Rezin. He appoints himself the king of a land named Syria, which is just north of Israel. That includes the city of Damascus, which you're probably familiar with. Currently part of Israel's property, but this man will be instrumental in separating it from Israel. They're going to lose land, and that's going to become Syria, not to be confused with Assyria, which we'll talk about later. So Hadad, Rezin, and then Jeroboam, who's going to be a significant character in verse 26. He's walking one day and he encounters a prophet, and the prophet tears his brand new robe or shirt or whatever and hands Jeroboam 10 pieces and says, you're going to be king over 10 of the tribes of Israel. And but apparently Solomon finds out, wants to kill him, so Jeroboam also flees. And when the end of Solomon's story comes, Jeroboam comes back to, now we're in chapter 12, Jeroboam comes back. Now, Rehoboam, sorry, these are getting confusing. Maybe I'll add some instructional slides here. We have Jeroboam, who is now promised the 10 tribes, and Rehoboam, similar name, sorry for the sloppy handwriting, who is going to get 2 of the tribes. Sometimes it's referred to as one of the tribes. And these are going to be called Israel, as it's already called, and Judah, after the one tribe that follows. It's actually Judah and Benjamin, but it's called Judah. And so if you're looking at your graphic, at the picture that we focus on, we have this growing, increasing of the promise of the fulfillment, and then on the next page, the very next graphic, is Israel split into 2, and you'll notice the growth, the progress that we've been following up to this point actually starts to decrease, but we'll get into that more here in a second. But it's Israel in the north, Judah in the south. So as we step into Act 1, Scene 2, we're going to see what God is going to do about the fact that that Solomon has messed up big time, and the kingdom is no longer being a blessing. It is in fact going to be an issue among the nations. About 300 years after Solomon's story, we come to a king who we'll discuss in the next lesson. His name is Josiah. 300 years later, and in 2 Kings 23, verse 13, Josiah mentions that, the text mentions that Josiah destroys altars, pagan altars that Solomon himself put in place. 300 years. And then 100 to 200 years after that, about 500 years after Solomon, Nehemiah, who we'll cover sometime in the future, Nehemiah is preaching the coolest sermon in the world. And he mentions the fact that all of the Israelites are intermarrying with foreign women. And he says, don't you remember what happened because of Solomon, how his wives led his heart astray? So now Solomon is the stuff of legends. He has changed Israel forever. And as soon as his son, Rehoboam, steps into the story, if you remember, that's the story where he consults all these old wise men and says, the people of Israel come to him and say, your father... that was the other crack in the story. When Solomon is building the temple, he enslaves 180,000 Israelites as slave labor, which is exactly what Samuel promised the people that a king would do. And so the Israelites come to Rehoboam and say, your father made our work hard. Will you make it any easier? Will you lighten up on us? And so Rehoboam says, come back in 3 days. He talks to some old men. They say, lighten the load. If you make it easier, the people will love you and will bless you. But he talks to his friends as well, and his friends say, no, tell him you're going to whip him with scorpions. And he likes the advice of his friends better. So all of Israel, including Jeroboam, come to Rehoboam, and they say, so what's your answer? Are you going to make it easier for us? And Rehoboam says, no, I'm going to make it harder. My father whipped you with whips. I'm going to whip you with scorpions. And so all of the people of Israel say, what lot do we have in Israel? Why do we even care that we're part of this country? We're out of here. And Jeroboam goes to start this new country. And so next time we'll pick up around chapter 12 and see what happens with Rehoboam and Jeroboam and their influence on the kingdom. But our next piece on the graphic is the story, well, this extends a little bit farther, the story of Israel and Judah splitting into 2. We'll cover this again, but the numbers that are on your graphic is because Israel lasts 211 years before it's taken into exile. Judah lasts 347, again, we'll cover this in a little bit, 347 years. And so those correspond to 722 BC. These are significant dates. And 586, let me double check if that's right. 586 BC, literal years in history when something happens, which I'll mention next time. 19 kings in Israel, 20 kings in Judah. We're going to look at their story. But what we see is just a repetition of what has come before, that that God can work with any broken people, and yet if someone's heart, if someone does not have the faith to trust God to do things, in this case Solomon's heart is led away. We see that brief moment where the promise is fulfilled and we think the story of the Bible is going to end and sin is going to be fixed and eradicated and God is going to send His Messiah that we've been waiting for, the snake crusher. And yet Solomon is not careful and he lets these women lead his heart astray, and the kingdom is ripped from him and torn in half. And as you can imagine, nothing good is going to come from it.